Today's events in history. November 1, 1348. The Black Death reaches London on or about this date. 1800. John Adams becomes the first United States president to live in the White House. 1911. The first aerial bomb is dropped by an Italian pilot on Turkish troops in Libya during the Italo-Turkish War. 1922. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk takes Constantinople from Mehmed, proclaiming the Republic of Turkey and bringing an end to the Ottoman Empire. 1941. Japanese naval staff officers Suzuki and Miyajima arrive to Pearl Harbor. 1977. President Jimmy Carter raises the minimum wage from $2.30 to $3.35 an hour. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 1, 1967. Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman, George Kennedy, and Strother Martin, is released. 1997. Titanic, directed by James Cameron, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, premieres at the Tokyo International Film Festival. Famous birthdays. Anthony Ramos, November 1, 1991. Aishwarya Rai, November 1, 1973. Today's events in sports history. November 1, 1987. Williams driver Nelson Piquet finishes 15th in the Japanese Grand Prix, but clinches his third Formula One World Drivers' Championship. 1994. Chicago Bulls retire basketball superstar Michael Jordan's jersey number 23 at the United Center. 1998. McLaren driver Mika Hakkinen wins season-ending Japanese Grand Prix to claim his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship. 2009. Mercedes driver Jenson Button finishes third in Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to win his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship. Famous birthdays. Milos Krasic, November 1, 1984. Today's events in history. November 2, 1783. General George Washington, later first U.S. president, bids farewell to his army after the American Revolutionary War. 1852. Democrat Franklin Pierce elected 14th President of the United States. 1898. Cheerleading begins in the United States as Johnny Campbell leads the crowd cheering on the football team at the University of Minnesota. 1992. First test flight of Airbus A330. 2000. The first crew arrives at the International Space Station. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 2, 1954. BBC radio comedy Hancock's Half-Hour debuts. 1979. Peter Shaffer's musical Amadeus premieres in London. 2003. Sitcom Arrested Development premieres. 2006. 7th Latin Grammy Awards. Shakira, first female artist to win Record of the Year, Album of the Year, and Song of the Year. 2015. The Hunger Games Part 2, directed by Francis Lawrence, starring Jennifer Lawrence, Josh Hutcherson, and Liam Hemsworth, premieres in Berlin. Famous birthdays. David Schwimmer, November 2, 1966. Today's events in sports history. November 2, 1969. 41-year-old Detroit right-wing Gordie Howe picks up his 19th and final NHL hat trick. 1988. Mexican radio station erroneously reports Mike Tyson had died in car crash. 1990. Golden State Warriors register a 162-158 win over the Denver Nuggets, with the 320 total points, setting an NBA record for most points scored by two teams in a non-overtime game. 1991. Second Rugby World Cup final. Australia beats England 12-6. 2008. Lewis Hamilton finishes fourth in season-ending Brazilian Grand Prix to clinch his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship by 1 point from Felipe Massa. 2011. Cristiano Ronaldo scores his 100th goal for Real Madrid in his 105th game. Famous birthdays. Alphonso Davies, November 2, 2000. Today's events in history. November 3, 1493. Christopher Columbus first sights land on his second voyage, the island of Dominica in the Windward Islands. 1783. George Washington orders Continental Army disbanded. 1796. John Adams elected as second President of the United States of America. 1812. French Napoleonic armies defeated at Vyazma by a Russian force commanded by General Miloradovich. 1900. First U.S. automobile show opens at Madison Square Garden. 1930. Bank of Italy, renamed Bank of America. 1941. Japanese Admiral Osamu Nagano presents a complete plan for the attack on Pearl Harbor to Emperor Hirohito. 1957. Soviet Union launches Sputnik 2 with space dog Laika aboard, the first animal in space. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 3, 1956. 1939 film The Wizard of Oz televised for first time. 1992, I Will Always Love You single released by Whitney Houston. Billboard Song of the Year 1993. 1998, Shakespeare in Love, directed by John Madden and starring Gwyneth Paltrow and Joseph Fiennes, premieres in New York. Best Picture of 1999. Famous birthdays. Charles Bronson, November 3, 1921. Kendall Jenner, November 3, 1995. Today's events in sports history. November 3, 1942. Boston Red Sox outfielder Ted Williams wins American League Triple Crown. 1968. Lotus driver Graham Hill wins his second Formula One World Drivers' Championship. 1985. Bill Elliott wins Atlanta Journal 500 at Atlanta Raceway to become first driver to win 11 superspeedway races in one season. 1990. Moses Malone sets an NBA record for free throws made in a career by hitting 7 of 9. 1996. Los Angeles Lakers superstar Kobe Bryant becomes the youngest player to make his NBA debut 2 months 11 days. 2019. Lewis Hamilton finishes second in the U.S. Grand Prix to clinch his 6th Formula One Drivers' World Championship. Famous birthdays. Gerd Muller, November 3, 1945. Colin Kaepernick, November 3, 1987. Today's events in history. November 4, 1841, first wagon train arrives in California after a 5.5-month and 1,730-mile journey over the Sierra Nevada from Missouri. 1856, James Buchanan elected 15th U.S. President. 1879, African-American inventor Thomas Elkins patents the refrigerating apparatus. 1890, Prince of Wales opens first underground station at Stockwell, South London. 1922, Howard Carter rediscovers the intact tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt. 1970, Russian nuclear physicist Andrei Sakharov forms Human Rights Committee. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 4, 1783, Mozart's Symphony No. 36 premieres in Linz, Austria. 1961, Bob Dylan makes his Carnegie Hall debut. Tickets priced at $2. 2001, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, first film adaptation of the book series by J.K. Rowling starring Daniel Radcliffe, premieres in London. 2015, Katy Perry is the highest-paid musician of the year, earning $135 million, according to Forbes magazine. 2016, British TV series The Crown premieres. 2018, Camila Cabello wins 4 awards at the MTV Europe Music Awards in Bilbao. Famous birthdays. Matthew McConaughey, November 4, 1969. Today's events in sports history. November 4, 1973, Chicago center Stan Mikita registers his 1,000th NHL career point. 1987, NBA announces 4 new franchises, Charlotte and Miami for 1988, Minneapolis and Orlando for 1989. 1989, first NBA game at Orlando Arena. Orlando Magic loses to Nets 111-16. 2001, Serena Williams wins the WTA Tour Championship in Munich. Famous birthdays. Ashraf Hakimi, November 4, 1998. Today's events in history. November 5, 1492, Christopher Columbus learns how to grow and harvest corn from Cuba's indigenous population. 1872, Ulysses Grant re-elected U.S. President. 1900, under U.S. and military control since the end of the Spanish-American War in 1898, Cuba now calls its own constitutional convention. 1936, French writer André Gide criticizes the Soviet regime. 1940, Roosevelt is re-elected President of the United States for an unprecedented third term. 2018, NASA's Voyager 2 probe leaves the solar system, becoming the second human-made object to reach interstellar space. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 5, 1956, The Nat King Cole Show debut on NBC, the first variety program to be hosted by an African American. 1997, French court orders producer Jacques Charrier, ex-husband of Brigitte Bardot, to pay the former screen star $8,300 in damages. 2003, 37th Country Music Association Award. Alan Jackson and Martina McBride win. 2019, actress Emma Watson, interviewed in Vogue magazine, says she is happy to be single. I call it being self-partnered, launching worldwide discussion on the term. Famous birthdays. Tilda Swinton, November 5, 1960. Today's events in sports history. November 5, 1933. Chicago Bears' 30-game unbeaten streak was ended by Patriots. 1954. Montreal Canadiens center Jean Beliveau scores 3 goals in 44 seconds to future Hall of Fame goaltender Terry Sawchuk. 1968. First IL pitcher to win MVP Denny McLain. 1978. Oakland Raiders John Madden becomes 13th coach to win 100 NFL games. 1982. Cleveland Cavaliers lose 24th consecutive game. NBA record. 1996. Yankees shortstop Derek Jeter is the unanimous choice as IL Rookie of the Year. Famous birthdays. Bill Walton, November 5, 1952. Virat Kohli, November 5, 1988. Today's events in history. November 6, 1860. Republican Abraham Lincoln of Illinois elected the 16th President of the United States of America. 1862. New York-San Francisco direct telegraphic link forms. 1913. Mahatma Gandhi arrested for leading Indian miners' march in South Africa. 1918. Republic of Poland proclaimed. 1991. Russian President Boris Yeltsin outlaws the Communist Party. 1991. The last oil fire in Kuwait set by retreating Iraqi troops is extinguished. 2007. London's Pancras Station with new high-speed extension and Eurostar connection officially opened by Queen Elizabeth II. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 6, 1973. James Bond film Man with the Golden Gun starring Roger Moore begins filming. 1975. First performance by punk band The Sex Pistols at Martin's College, London. 1990. Arsenio Hall gets a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. 1996. The English Patient, directed by Anthony Minghella and starring Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche, premieres in Los Angeles. Best Picture of 1997. 2005. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the 4th film of the series, premieres, becomes the most successful film of the year, earning almost $900 million. 2018. British actor Idris Elba named People magazine's sexiest man alive. Famous birthdays. Ollie Field, November 6, 1946. Emma Stone, November 6, 1988. Today's events in sports history. November 6, 1869. First U.S. college football game. Players use their hands or feet. 1934. Philadelphia Eagles beat Cincinnati Reds 64-0. 1993. Evander Holyfield beats Riddick Bowe in 12 for heavyweight boxing title. Famous birthdays. Anna Ivanovic, November 6, 1987. Today's events in history. November 7, 1558. French King Henry II occupies Calais. 1907. Delta Sigma Pi, a professional fraternity organized to foster the study of business in universities, is founded at New York University. 1916. Jeannette Rankin is elected to Congress as its first woman representative. 1918. The influenza epidemic spreads to Western Samoa, killing 7,542, about 20% of the population by the end of the year. 1931. Chinese People's Republic proclaimed by Mao Zedong. 1942. First U.S. president to broadcast in a foreign language. Roosevelt in French. 2019. Queen Elizabeth II confirms she is no longer buying clothes made with real fur. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 7, 1995. Howard Stern's second book, Miss America, released. 1997. Bean film directed by Mel Smith and starring Rowan Atkinson as Mr. Bean opens in the U.S. 2000. Tim Russert famously declares the outcome of the 2000 presidential election will depend on Florida during NBC coverage. Famous birthdays. David Guetta, November 7, 1967. Today's events in sports history. November 7, 1962. Glenn Hall set NHL record of 503 consecutive games as goalie. 1988. Sugar Ray Leonard knockouts Donnie Lalonde. 1991. Magic Johnson announces he has HIV virus and retires from Lakers. Famous birthdays. Rio Ferdinand, November 7, 1978. Deaths. Beau Frazier, November 7, 2011, when he was 67. Today's events in history. November 8, 1731. Benjamin Franklin opens first library in the North American colonies, the Library Company of Philadelphia. 1864. Abraham Lincoln elected to his second term as American president. 1895. German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen produces and detects electromagnetic radiation in a wavelength range today known as X-rays. 2020. Global recorded cases of COVID-19 pass 50 million. Today's events in film, television and music history. November 8, 1935. Mutiny on the Bounty, directed by Frank Lloyd and starring Charles Laughton and Clark Gable, premieres in New York. Best production of 1936. 1999. The World Is Not Enough, 19th James Bond film, premieres in Los Angeles. 2022. Actor Chris Evans named People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive, says, "My mom will be so happy." Today's events in sports history. November 8, 1990. Darryl Strawberry signs 5-year contract with LA Dodgers. 1991. Paul Coffey sets NHL defenseman scoring mark with 311th goal. 1992. Nigel Mansell in a Williams crashes during the season-ending Australian Grand Prix, but wins his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship. 1994. Cleveland Cavaliers' first game at Gund Arena lose to Houston Rockets, 100-98. Famous birthdays. Micah Kallio, November 8, 1982. Today's events in history. November 9, 1620. After a month of delays off the English coast and about 2 months at sea, the Mayflower spots land. 1799. Napoleon Bonaparte pulls off a coup and becomes the dictator of France under the title of First Consul. 1906. Theodore Roosevelt is first U.S. president to visit another country, Puerto Rico and Panama. 1907. The Cullinan diamond, the largest ever discovered, is presented to King Edward on his birthday. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 9, 1939. Romantic comedy film Ninotchka, directed by Ernst Lubitsch and starring Greta Garbo, premieres. 2011. Shakira is honored as Latin Recording Academy Person of the Year. 2015. Love Yourself single released by Justin Bieber. 2021. Actor Paul Rudd is named People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. Today's events in sports history. November 9, 1982. Sugar Ray Leonard retires for first time. 1985. Russia's Garry Kasparov becomes the youngest ever world chess champion, 22 years old. October 1996. Evander Holyfield upsets Mike Tyson in 11th round knockout in Las Vegas to regain WBA heavyweight boxing title, second boxer after Muhammad Ali to win a heavyweight title 3 times. 2008. American tennis star Venus Williams wins her first career year-ending title. Today's events in history. November 10, 1885. German engineer Gottlieb Daimler unveils the world's first motorcycle. 1917. New Bolshevik government under Lenin suspends freedom of press during October Revolution. 1926. Vincent Massey becomes first Canadian minister to U.S. Famous birthdays. Martin Luther, November 10, 1483. Mikhail Kalashnikov, November 10, 1919. Deaths. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, November 10, 1938, when he was 57. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 10, 1940. Walt Disney begins serving as an informer for the Los Angeles office of the FBI. His job is to report back information on Hollywood subversives. 1990. John Hughes's film Home Alone, directed by Chris Columbus and starring Macaulay Culkin, premieres in Chicago. 2014. The Hunger Games Mockingjay, directed by Francis Lawrence and starring Jennifer Lawrence and Josh Hutcherson, premieres in London. 2014. Uptown Funk single released by Bruno Mars. Famous birthdays. Kiernan Shipka, November 10, 1999. Today's events in sports history. November 10, 1963. Detroit right-wing Gordie Howe surpasses Maurice Richard as leading NHL all-time goal scorer with 545th career goal. 1978. Larry Holmes knock out Alfredo Evangelist in 7 for heavyweight boxing title. 2003. Kim Clijsters of Belgium becomes first female tennis player to earn $4 million in a season. Famous birthdays. Kendrick Perkins, November 10, 1984. Today's events in history. November 11, 1158. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa declares himself ruler of North Italy. 1918. Independence of Poland proclaimed by Józef Pilsudski. 1925. American scientist Robert Millikan announces discovery of cosmic rays. 1942. 745 French Jews deported to Auschwitz. 1987. Van Gogh's irises sells for record $53 million at auction. 1994. Bill Gates buys Leonardo da Vinci's Codex for $30 million, then the most expensive manuscript ever sold. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 11, 1901. Maurice Ravel's piano composition Jouix du premieres. 1963. Brian Epstein and Ed Sullivan sign a 3-show contract for appearances by the Beatles. 2008. Taylor Swift releases her second studio album Fearless. 2013. The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, directed by Francis Lawrence, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Josh Hutcherson, premieres in London. Famous birthdays. Demi Moore, November 11, 1962. Leonardo DiCaprio, November 11, 1974. Today's events in sports history. November 11, 1982. Joe Altobelli succeeds retiring Earl Weaver as Baltimore Orioles manager. 2001. Federation Cup Women's Tennis, Madrid, Spain. Kim Clijsters beats Elena Dementieva, clinch Belgium's first title. 2013. Novak Djokovic claims back-to-back ATP World Tour Finals tennis title. Famous birthdays. Fuzzy Zoeller, November 11, 1951. Philip Lame, November 11, 1983. Today's events in history. November 12, 1880. Best-selling American novel Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ by soldier Lew Wallace is published. 1936. Nobel Prize for Literature awarded to American playwright Eugene O'Neill. 1960. Military coup against Republic of Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem fails. 1966. Buzz Aldrin takes the first space selfie, a photo of himself performing extravehicular activity in space during the Gemini program. 1990. The World Wide Web is first proposed by CERN computer scientists Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Calillo. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 12, 1984. Paul McCartney releases single We All Stand Together. 1991. U.S. TV series Full House 100th episode. The Twins Are Born. 2021. L.A. judge rules to end Britney Spears' conservatorship, which had controlled almost all aspects of her life for 14 years. 2021. Taylor Swift releases her directorial debut, the short film All Too Well, alongside her re-recorded album Red. Famous birthdays. Ryan Gosling, November 12, 1980. Anne Hathaway, November 12, 1982. Today's events in sports history. November 12, 1972, 22nd NASCAR Sprint Cup. Richard Petty wins. 1981. Billy Martin named AL Manager of Year. 1991. Atlanta Brave Tom Glavine wins NL Cy Young Award. 1995. Michael Schumacher claims second straight Formula One World Drivers' Championship Australian Grand Prix. 2012. Joe Sakic, Mats Sundin, Pavel Bure, and Adam Oates are inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Today's events in history. November 13, 1789, in a letter to Jean-Baptiste Lalleroy, Benjamin Franklin writes, "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." 1839, last bull run in Britain as the Stamford Bull Run ends after 700 years. 1856, the great bell of Big Ben first chimes at the foot of the still unfinished clock tower outside the Palace of Westminster. 2001, U.S. President George Bush orders that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve be filled to capacity over the next few years. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 13, 1997. Lion King opens at New Amsterdam Theatre. 1999. Toy Story 2, directed by John Lasseter, starring Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, premieres in the U.S. 2000. The Beatles release their compilation album One. 2001. Colombian singer-songwriter Shakira's fifth studio album and first English-language album, Laundry Service, is released. 2002. Eminem releases single Lose Yourselves from soundtrack of 8 Mile, first rap song to win Academy Award Best Original Song. 2020. British pop singer Harry Styles becomes the first ever solo male featured on the cover of Vogue magazine. Famous birthdays. Gerard Butler, November 13, 1969. Today's events in sports history. November 13, 1951, Lefty O'Doul's All-Stars, including Joe DiMaggio and Billy Martin, lose 3-1 to Pacific League All-Star Team. 1988, Ayrton Senna finishes second in the Australian Grand Prix to win his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship. 1994, 44th NASCAR Sprint Cup, Dale Earnhardt wins. 1994, Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill famously collide on lap 35 in the Australian Grand Prix. Schumacher wins his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship by 1 point from Hill. Famous birthdays. Lando Norris, November 13, 1999. Today's events in history. November 17, 1796, Battle of Arcole. French forces under Napoleon Bonaparte defeat an Austrian force led by Joseph Alvinci after a 3-day battle at Arcole. Republic of Venice, 1855. David Livingstone becomes the first European to see Victoria Falls in what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe. 1917. Vladimir Lenin defends temporary removal of freedom of the press. 1922. The last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed, is expelled to Malta on a British warship. 1970. Douglas Engelbart receives the patent for the first computer mouse. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 17, 1987. The Madonna compilation album You Can Dance is released. 2003. Britney Spears, at 21 years old, becomes the youngest singer to get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. 2008. Twilight, directed by Catherine Hardwicke, starring Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, premieres in Los Angeles. Famous birthdays. Martin Scorsese, November 17, 1942. Rachel McAdams, November 17, 1978. Tom Ellis, November 17, 1978. Today's events in sports history. November 17, 1959. Giants future Baseball Hall of Fame slugger Willie McCovey wins NL Rookie of the Year. 1985. 35th NASCAR Sprint Cup. Darrell Waltrip wins. 1991. 41st NASCAR Sprint Cup. Dale Earnhardt wins. 1997. Mario Lemieux enters NHL Hall of Fame. 2013. Sebastian Vettel wins. Record 8th consecutive Formula One race with victory and United States Grand Prix. Today's events in history. November 18, 1477. First English-dated printed book, Dictes and Sciences of the Philosophers, by William Caxton at his press in London. 1626. St. Peter's Basilica is consecrated in Rome, replacing an earlier basilica on the same site and becoming the world's largest Christian basilica. 1936. Germany and Italy recognize Spanish government of Francisco Franco. 1964. Edgar Hoover describes Martin Luther King as a most notorious liar. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 18, 1980. Heaven's Gate film directed by Michael Cimino, starring Chris Cofferson and Christopher Walken premieres. 1997. Metallica released the album Reload. 2005. Walk the Line, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Johnny Cash and Reese Witherspoon as June Carter, and directed by James Mangold. 2011. One Direction released their debut album All Night. 2020. Michael Jordan named Sexiest Man Alive by People magazine. Today's events in sports history. November 18, 1970. Johnny Bench wins NL MVP. 1979. 29th NASCAR Series Cup. Richard Petty is the first person to win 7 times. 1986. Roger Clemens wins ALM MVP. 1990. 40th NASCAR Sprint Cup. Dale Earnhardt wins. Famous birthdays. David Ortiz, November 18, 1975. Today's events in history. November 19, 1581. Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich dies after being attacked by his father Ivan the Terrible 3 days earlier. 1911. New York receives first Marconi wireless transmission from Italy. In 1976, American publishing. Heiress Patty Hearst is freed on $15 million bail, pending appeal of bank robbery conviction. 1998. Vincent van Gogh's Portrait of the Artist Without Beard sells at auction for $71 million. 2018. Ivanka Trump sent hundreds of emails from her personal account about government business, according to Washington Post report. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 19, 1979. Chuck Berry released from prison for income tax evasion conviction. 2010. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, the 7th film, is released worldwide. 2019, The Weeknd releases his single Blinding Lights, becomes the longest charting song on Billboard's Top 100 with 90 weeks. 2021, Adele releases her 4th studio album 30, Famous Birthdays. Jodie Foster, November 19, 1962. Adam Driver, November 19, 1983. Today's events in sports history. November 19, 1978. 28th NASCAR Sprint Cup. Cale Yarborough wins. 1983. Jari Kurri becomes the first and only live finish player to score 5 goals in a game. 2017. Martin Truex, driving for Furniture Row Racing, wins Ford EcoBoost 400 at Homestead Miami Speedway. 2019. LeBron James hits 25 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 assists against Oklahoma City Thunder and becomes the first player to record a triple-double against all 30 franchises. Today's events in history. November 20, 1755. English minister William Pitt the Elder resigns. 1931. Rolls-Royce acquisition of Bentley Motors is announced. 1936. Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera, founder of the Falange, is killed by a Republican execution squad. 1945. Queen Wilhelmina opens Dutch Parliament in Hague. 1995. Diana, Princess of Wales, admits she cheated on Prince Charles in a TV interview. 2022. U.S. President Joe Biden turns 80 years old, becoming first octogenarian to serve in country's highest office. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 20, 1983, musical Marilyn, an American fable starring Allison Reed and Scott Bakula, opens at Minskoff Theater. 1997, revival of Anton Chekhov's stage drama Ivanovs, starring Kevin Kline, opens at Vivian Beaumont Theater. 2011, 39th American Music Awards. Adele, Bruno Mars, and Taylor Swift win. 2016, 44th American Music Awards. Drake, Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, Carrie Underwood win. Famous birthdays. Future, November 20, 1983. Today's events in sports history. November 20, 1962. Mickey Mantle wins AL Most Valued Player for the third time. 1969. Brazilian soccer icon Pelé scores his 1,000th goal. 1971. 21st NASCAR Sprint Cup. Richard Petty wins. 1977. 27th NASCAR Sprint Cup. Cale Yarborough wins. 1977. Walter Payton rushes for NFL record 275 yards. 1983. 33rd NASCAR Sprint Cup. Bobby Allison wins. 1988. 38th NASCAR Sprint Cup. Bill Elliott wins. 2022. Max Verstappen retains Formula One Drivers' Championship for Red Bull with a win in the season-ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Today's events in history. November 21, 1806. The Continental System declared in the Decree of Berlin. Emperor Napoleon bans all trade with Britain. 1890. Edison Lab records the first surviving motion picture. 1917. Maxim Gorky calls Vladimir Lenin a blind fanatic and unthinking adventurer. 1953. Authorities at the British Natural History Museum announce the Piltdown Man skull, one of the most famous fossil skulls in the world, is a hoax. 1989. Law banning smoking on most domestic flights signed by President George Bush. 2019. Elon Musk launches Tesla's electric Cybertruck with shatterproof windows that, when demonstrated on stage, shatter. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 21, 1920. Silent film The Last of the Mohicans released. 1931. Horror film Frankenstein is released. 1976. Rocky, directed by John Avildsen and starring Sylvester Stallone, premieres in New York. Best Picture of 1977. 2013. Happy Single is released by Pharrell Williams. Billboard Song of the Year 2014 and Grammy Award for Best Pop Solo Performance 2015. Famous birthdays. Goldie Hawn, November 21, 1945. Isabel May, November 21, 2000. Today's events in sports history. November 21, 1982. 32nd NASCAR Sprint Cup. Darrell Waltrip wins. 1994. First-class cricket debut of Andrew Simmons. 2004. Roger Federer wins back-to-back season-ending Tennis Masters Cup titles with a victory over Lleyton Hewitt in the final in Houston. 2021. Alexander Zverev captures his second ATP Finals men's tennis title by defeating Daniil Medvedev. 2021. Lewis Hamilton wins first Qatar Grand Prix Formula One motor race. Today's events in history. November 22, 1903. Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt are engaged. 1963. U.S. President John Kennedy assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald while riding in an open-topped motorcade in Dallas, Texas. 1975. Juan Carlos proclaimed King of Spain as monarchy restored after 31 years. 2005. Angela Merkel becomes the first female chancellor of Germany. Famous birthdays. George Eliot, November 22, 1819. Enver Pasha, November 22, 1881. Charles de Gaulle, November 22, 1890. Deaths. John Kennedy, November 22, 1963, when he was 46. Today's events in film, television and music history. November 22, 1862, Opera La Forza del Destino by Giuseppe Verdi debuts at Bolshoi Theater. 1991, film The Addams Family starring Raul Julia, Angelica Houston and Christina Ricci is released. 1995, to Toy Story, the first feature-length film created completely using computer-generated imagery, directed by John Lasseter and starring Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, is released. 2010, Def Jam Recordings and Rockefeller Records release American rapper and producer Kanye West's fifth studio album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. 2010, Universal Motown Records releases Nicki Minaj's debut album Pink Friday. Famous birthdays: Scarlett Johansson, November 22, 1984. Today's events in sports history. November 22, 1970, 20th NASCAR Sprint Cup, Bobby Isaac wins. 1981, 31st NASCAR Sprint Cup, Darrell Waltrip wins. 1989, Kirby Puckett signs record $3 million per year contract with Minnesota Twins. 1991, New York Knicks pay Patrick Ewing a record $18.8 million for 2-year extension. 2008, Patrick Roy's number 33 jersey is retired by the Montreal Canadiens. 2014, Lionel Messi sets a new goal-scoring record in La Liga with 253 goals. Today's events in history. November 23, 800 Charlemagne arrives in Rome to investigate the alleged crimes of Pope Leo. 1248, conquest of Seville by Christian troops under King Ferdinand and III of Castile after the city capitulates. 1654, French mathematician, scientist, and religious philosopher Blaise Pascal experiences an intense mystical vision that marks him for life. 1942, Chinese steward Poon Lim begins 133 days adrift after British ship SS Ben Lomond is torpedoed by a German U-boat, leaving him as the sole survivor. 2021, manuscript of early workings of Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, one of the most important scientific documents of the 20th century, sells at auction for $13 million. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 23, 1991, Freddie Mercury confirms he has AIDS the day before he dies. 1993, Doggy-Style debut album by Snoop Doggy Dogg is released. Billboard Album of the Year 1994. 2022, TV series Wednesday produced by Tim Burton, starring Jenna Ortega and Gwendoline Christie, released on Netflix. Famous birthdays: Miley Cyrus, November 23, 1992. Today's events in sports history. November 23, 1904, first U.S. Olympic Games close in St. Louis. 1988, Wayne Gretzky scores his 600th AL goal. 2014, Lewis Hamilton wins season-ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to clinch his second Formula One World Drivers' Championship. 2014, Magnus Carlsen defends his World Chess Championship title after defeating Vishy Anand. Deaths: David Johnson, November 23, 2022, when he was 71. Today's events in history. November 24, 1542, Battle of Solway Moss. English beat Scottish King James. 1639, first observation of transit of Venus by Jeremiah Horrocks and William Crabtree helped establish size of the solar system. 1642, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman is the first European to discover Van Diemen's Land. 1947, John Steinbeck's novella The Pearl published. 1979, Senate report proves U.S. troops in Vietnam were exposed to the toxic chemical defoliant agent orange. 1983, The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett, published by Colin Smythe. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 24, 1933, Fred Astaire's first film, Dancing Lady, released. 1966, the Beatles began recording sessions for their album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. 1966, the cult classic 1 Million Years BC, starring Raquel Welch, is released first in West Germany. 1979, Salem's Lot, American two-part miniseries based on the horror novel of the same name by Stephen King, concludes in the United States. Famous birthdays: Katherine Heigl, November 24, 1978. Deaths: Freddie Mercury, November 24, 1991, when he was 45. Today's events in sports history. November 24, 1957, Cleveland Browns fullback Jim Brown sets club record of 237 yards rushing. 1960, Wilt Chamberlain pulls down NBA record with 55 rebounds. 1974, 24th NASCAR Sprint Cup, Richard Petty wins. 1991, Monica Seles sets female tennis record, winning prize money of $2.5 million in a year. 2013, Sebastian Vettel wins Brazilian Grand Prix, his record 9th straight Grand Prix victory, record equaling 13th consecutive Grand Prix win, 4th straight World Drivers' Championship. Today's events in history. November 25, 1165. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa visits Utrecht. 1500. Governor de Bobadilla of Santo Domingo captures Christopher Columbus. 1741. Elizabeth of Russia seizes power in a coup with the aid of Imperial Russian Guards in St. Petersburg, Russia. 1792. Benjamin Banneker first publishes his Farmer's Almanac. 1990. Lech Walesa wins Poland's first popular election. 1994. Sony founder Akio Morita announces he will be stepping down as CEO of the company. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 25, 1902, Franz Leher's opera Wiener Frohend premieres in Vienna. 2013, Disney releases Frozen. Original Motion Picture Soundtrack Grammy Award for Best Compilation Soundtrack for Visual Media. 2015, 2014 Billboard Album of the Year. 2020, The New York Times names its 25 greatest actors of the 21st century, with Denzel Washington at number 1. Today's events in sports history. November 25, 1940, football team University of Michigan retires Tom Harmon's number 98. 1961, NBA's Bob Cousy becomes second player to score 15,000 points. 2012, Sebastian Vettel finishes 4th in Brazilian Grand Prix to claim his 3rd consecutive Formula One World Drivers' Championship by 3 points from Fernando Alonso. 2014, Lionel Messi becomes the UEFA Champions League all-time top scorer. 2018, Lewis Hamilton wins Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to claim his 5th Formula One World Drivers' Championship by 88 points from Sebastian Vettel. Mercedes' 5th straight constructors title. Famous birthdays. Upper Alonso, November 25, 1981. Today's events in history. November 30, 1487. The first German beer purity law is promulgated in Munich. 1700. Battle at Narva. Swedish forces of King Charles defeat Russian army. 1753. Benjamin Franklin receives the Godfrey Copley Medal on account of his curious experiments and observations on electricity. 1993. President Clinton signs Brady Gun Control Bill. 2006. American folk artist Grandma Moses is 1943, painting sugaring off cells for a record $1.3 million for the artist by Christie's in New York. Today's events in film, television, and music history. November 30, 1979. Pink Floyd's The Wall released, sells 6 million copies in 2 weeks. 1982. Thriller, 6th studio album by Michael Jackson is released. 1993. Schindler's List, American historical drama film premieres in Washington. 2021. Josephine Baker becomes the first black woman to be honored at Paris's Pantheon. 2022. Harry Styles' Single As It Was is the most streamed song globally for Spotify in 2022. Famous birthdays. Chrissy Teigen, November 30, 1985. Today's events in sports history. November 30, 1942. Bill Terry resigns as supervisor of New York Giants minor league system. 1981. New York Yankee Dave Righetti wins AL Rookie of Year Award. 1986. American-based Czech tennis star Ivan Lendl is first player to make over $10 million in career earnings. 2005. The Boston Bruins trade captain Joe Thornton to the San Jose Sharks. 2015. Kobe Bryant announces his intention to retire at the end of the season. Famous birthdays. Magnus Carlsen, November 30, 1990. Follow for tomorrow.